They waited in the shadow of death, not for days, not for months, but for decades. Some were locked in tiny cells for over 30 years, hearing the countdown in silence. And when the day finally came, the world had almost forgotten them. This is what happens when justice takes a lifetime. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Join our growing community of true crime followers who want the full story, no matter how long it takes. Jack Alderman, Georgia. Jack Alderman's name is etched into the history of American capital punishment, not just for his crime, but for how long he waited to die. Convicted in 1975 for the murder of his wife, Barbara Jean Alderman, he would ultimately spend over 33 years on death row, making him the longest-serving death row inmate ever executed in the United States at the time of his death in 2008. The crime itself was both personal and disturbing. Prosecutors allege that Jack Alderman plotted with a friend, John Arthur Brown, to kill his wife in order to collect a $10,000 life insurance policy. On the night of the murder, Barbara was beaten and drowned in the bathtub of their home in Savannah, Georgia. Her body was later found dumped in a local swamp. Brown confessed and testified against Alderman in exchange for a life sentence, though he was paroled after just 12 years. Alderman, however, maintained his innocence from the beginning and claimed he was wrongfully convicted based solely on Brown's testimony. What followed was an extraordinary legal saga that stretched across 3 decades. Alderman's case went through multiple appeals in both state and federal courts. He came within hours of execution more than once, as death warrants were signed, stayed, and then signed again. Supporters pointed to inconsistencies in the prosecution's case and the questionable reliability of Brown's testimony. Over the years, Alderman gained a modest following of advocates, including clergy and former prison staff, who described him as deeply spiritual, calm, and rehabilitated. Despite the outcry, all legal avenues were exhausted by 2008. On September 16th, the state of Georgia carried out Alderman's execution by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson. He was 57 years old. As he lay strapped to the gurney, Jack Alderman offered a simple yet solemn final statement: God bless. He spoke no words of anger or defiance, no last-minute proclamations of innocence, just 2 words delivered quietly. In the end, his case remains one of the starkest examples of how long justice, or the machinery of it, can take to complete its course. Whether Alderman was guilty or not, the fact that he waited 33 years to be executed continues to raise questions about due process, the appeals system, and the psychological toll of extended death row confinement. His death didn't just mark the end of a sentence, it marked a historic milestone, one that few before or after have reached. Thomas Wessenhant, Alabama. Thomas Arthur Wessenhant was a name that struck fear into Alabama in the 1970s, a man whose crimes were as brutal as they were calculated. Convicted of multiple rapes and murders, his legacy is one of violence, prolonged justice, and the deeply unsettling question: how long is too long to wait for execution? Wessenhant's crimes spanned several years and included some of the most disturbing acts in the region's criminal history. He was first convicted for the 1976 abduction, rape, and murder of 22-year-old convenience store clerk Cheryl Lynn Payton. What shocked investigators was not just the killing itself, but the sadistic aftermath. He had returned to the crime scene to mutilate the body hours later. During the investigation, authorities linked him to at least 2 other unsolved murders of women dating back to 1975. He eventually confessed to those as well. In 1981, following years of legal wrangling and retrials, Wessenhant was officially sentenced to death, but his execution wouldn't come swiftly. Through a maze of appeals, reversals, resentencing hearings, and federal court reviews, he remained on Alabama's death row for an astonishing 32 years, 8 months, and 20 days, one of the longest stays in U.S. death penalty history. This prolonged incarceration ignited fierce debate. Critics argued that such a delay was a form of psychological torture, as death row inmates often spend decades in solitary confinement under extreme stress and mental degradation. Others pointed to the inefficiencies of the justice system. How could a man who had confessed to multiple murders remain alive for over 3 decades, while families of the victims waited endlessly for closure? By the time Wissenhant was executed by lethal injection on May 27, 2010, he was 63 years old. The state did not release any final statement from him, and no last words were reported. Witnesses said the execution was carried out without incident, though the emotional toll on the victims' families remained. For Alabama and the nation, the case of Thomas Wissenhant raised troubling questions about justice delayed. Was the punishment truly served if it came so late? Or did the years spent awaiting death serve as an additional sentence beyond what the courts had originally handed down? What's certain is this: Wissenhant's execution marked the end of one of Alabama's most chilling criminal chapters and highlighted the immense complexity and moral weight that comes with carrying out a death sentence decades after the crime. Carrie Dean Moore, Nebraska. Carrie Dean Moore holds the grim distinction of being one of the longest-serving death row inmates in U.S. history and the first person executed in Nebraska in more than 2 decades. Sentenced in 1980 for the cold-blooded murders of 2 Omaha cab drivers, Moore would go on to spend 38 years waiting for his sentence to be carried out. The crimes were shocking in their randomness and brutality. In August 1979, Moore lured 2 separate taxi drivers, Maynard Helgeland and Roel Van Ness Jr., into isolated areas under the pretense of needing a ride. He then shot both men in the head, execution style, with a stolen handgun. Investigators described the murders as calculated and remorseless, with no motive beyond Moore's desire to commit a high-profile crime. He later admitted to the killings, expressing a desire to be remembered. Moore was just 21 years old when he received the death sentence. Over the next nearly 4 decades, his case would wind through the court system in a slow-motion legal battle, marked by appeals, automatic reviews, and shifts in public opinion on capital punishment. At several points, Moore openly waived his appeals, stating he was ready to accept the consequences of his actions. But those efforts were delayed as legal challenges, both his own and those surrounding Nebraska's execution methods, kept his execution on hold. In fact, Nebraska hadn't executed anyone since 1997. Moore's case broke that streak on August 14, 2018, when the state carried out his death sentence using a new 4-drug lethal injection protocol, a first for Nebraska, which had previously used the electric chair. The controversial use of fentanyl as part of the lethal cocktail also drew national attention and reignited debates about execution procedures in the U.S. Despite the gravity of the moment, Moore's final actions were quiet and composed. He declined a special last meal, opting instead for the standard prison fare. As he lay on the gurney in the execution chamber, his last words were simple, yet striking. God bless you all. A calm goodbye from a man who had waited nearly 4 decades to die. For Nebraska, the execution marked the end of an era and the beginning of renewed questions about the length of time inmates spend on death row, the ethical use of new execution drugs, and the cost, both financial and emotional, of a death penalty process that spans generations. Carrie Dean Moore's story is a reminder that justice, when delayed for nearly 40 years, comes not with certainty, but with a haunting sense of weight. Raymond Riles. Texas Raymond Riles' case stands as one of the most extreme examples of delayed justice in American history. Convicted in 1976 for the murder of a Houston used car salesman, Riles would spend the next 45 years on Texas death row, a record that made him the longest-serving death row inmate in the United States. And yet, after decades of waiting for execution, it never came. The crime was violent and senseless. On February 1974, Riles and an accomplice entered a used car lot in Houston. After a dispute over a vehicle's down payment, Riles shot and killed 33-year-old John Henry, a father and businessman. The attack was abrupt and cold-blooded. Authorities quickly apprehended Riles, and in 1976, he was sentenced to death by a Texas jury. But from the beginning, Riles' mental health became a central issue. Throughout his time on death row, he displayed signs of severe paranoid schizophrenia and delusional behavior, at times claiming that demons were controlling his mind or that executioners were trying to poison him. Multiple courts acknowledged his mental illness, and over the years, stays of execution were granted on the grounds of incompetency to be executed, as required by law. What kept him on death row for so long, however, wasn't just his mental state, it was procedural gridlock. In Texas, death sentences from the 1970s were rendered under jury instructions that the U.S. Supreme Court would later rule unconstitutional. Yet for decades, Riles' appeals for a new sentencing hearing were denied. Finally, in 2021, after pressure from legal advocacy groups and a fresh review of his case, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Riles' death sentence, citing both his long-standing mental illness and the unconstitutional jury instructions at his original trial. He was sentenced to life in prison, meaning he would live out the rest of his days behind bars, but not face execution. At the time of his resentencing, Riles was 70 years old and had spent more than 4 decades in solitary confinement. His case reignited national debate over the fairness of the death penalty, particularly for mentally ill inmates, and how systemic failures can leave people in legal limbo for generations. Raymond Riles was never executed, but his name is now permanently etched in the history of America's death penalty system as a man who waited longer than anyone else for a death sentence that was never carried out. Gary Alvord. Florida Gary Alvord's case remains one of the most haunting examples of prolonged confinement on death row in American history. Convicted in 1974 for the rape and murder of 3 women in Tampa, Florida, Alvord spent nearly 39 years awaiting execution. Yet he died of natural causes in 2013 without the state ever carrying out his sentence. The crimes were brutal. In a chilling spree, Alvord broke into the homes of 3 women, Carol Thomas, Joyce Rock, and Dorothy Brady, over a period of weeks in 1973. Each woman was raped and strangled. The attack shocked the community, and Alvord, already an escapee from a Michigan mental institution, was quickly arrested and charged. He confessed to the murders, and in 1974, a Florida jury sentenced him to death. But from the beginning, Alvord's mental health became a legal and ethical flashpoint. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and other severe psychiatric disorders, Alvord was frequently declared mentally unfit for execution under the standards established by the U.S. Supreme Court. Court-appointed psychiatrists consistently found that he lacked a rational understanding of his punishment or the reason for it, a constitutional requirement for executions to proceed. Despite this, the state of Florida kept Alvord on death row for nearly 4 decades. During this time, he was confined in near total isolation in a 6-by-9-foot cell at Florida State Prison in Rayford. His execution was postponed repeatedly, not by legal maneuvering or appeals, but because he was simply too mentally ill to kill, yet not deemed eligible for removal from death row. He ultimately died of a brain tumor on May 19, 2013, at the age of 66. By then, he had spent longer on death row than any other Florida inmate in modern history. His case was notable not only for its duration, but for what it revealed about the system. A man too sick to execute, yet not removed from death row, kept in legal limbo for nearly 40 years. Gary Alvord's story raises painful questions. Was justice ever served? Is it humane or constitutional to keep a mentally ill man condemned for decades, even if execution is impossible? His death, natural rather than state-imposed, marked the end of a case that had long troubled legal experts and human rights advocates alike. In the end, Alvord wasn't executed by lethal injection or electric chair. He was executed by time itself. Richard Jordan, Mississippi. On June 25, 2025, Richard Gerald Jordan was executed in Mississippi, marking the end of one of the longest-running death row cases in American history. At 79 years old, Jordan wasn't just one of the oldest men ever executed in the U.S. He also held the rare distinction of having spent nearly 50 years on death row. His story is one of chilling crime, legal twists, and a system that took almost half a century to carry out a sentence. Jordan's crime dates back to January 1976. In a calculated plot to kidnap and ransom a wealthy banker's wife, Jordan abducted Edwina Martyr, a 34-year-old mother of 3 from Gulfport, Mississippi. He called her husband, demanding a $25,000 ransom, but by that point, Edwina was already dead. Jordan had shot her in the back of the head and dumped her body in a wooded area. His plan unraveled quickly. Police tracked the ransom call and apprehended him within days. Jordan confessed to the murder, and by May 1976, he was sentenced to death. What followed wasn't swift justice, but decades of courtroom battles, reversals, and resentencings. His original sentence was overturned in 1982 due to constitutional issues, and a new sentencing hearing was ordered. In 1991, he was again sentenced to death, but appeals over flawed jury instructions and other technicalities kept him in legal limbo. During that time, death penalty laws changed. In 1998, Mississippi offered him the chance to serve life without parole, but Jordan refused, believing the deal was unfair after so many years already served. He was willing to take his case to the end. Jordan's attorneys repeatedly cited the absurdity of carrying out an execution nearly 5 decades after the crime, especially given his advanced age and declining health. Still, in May 2025, the Mississippi Supreme Court signed a death warrant, and his execution was scheduled for June 25, 2025. At 6:02 p.m., Richard Jordan was strapped to a gurney inside the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman. He declined a special last meal and spoke calmly before his execution. His final words were, "To the martyr family, I am deeply sorry. I hope you find peace. To those who cared for me, thank you. I will see you on the other side, all of you." The lethal injection began moments later, and he was pronounced dead at 6:16 p.m. Present in the witness chamber were his wife, attorney, and spiritual advisor. The victim's family did not attend, but issued a written statement afterward, saying they finally had closure after decades of grief. Decades spent in solitary confinement, endless legal appeals. The wait before execution can stretch longer than a lifetime. These stories reveal not just the crimes, but the extreme delays in carrying out justice. Whether due to broken legal systems, mental health concerns, or procedural errors, these executions didn't happen quickly. And for some, they never happened at all. If you found this video insightful, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping true crime content. What do you think? Should executions be faster, or are decades of appeals a necessary safeguard? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. More chilling cases are coming soon, from the world's longest serving inmates to last meals and final words that will haunt you. Stay safe and stay curious.